The car's headlights flickered as I drove down Hollow Creek Road at 2 a.m. I shouldn't have taken the shortcut. The locals warned me. No one crosses that old bridge after midnight. Not since the accident 30 years ago. But I didn't believe in small-town superstitions until I saw her standing in the middle of the road, soaking wet despite the clear night sky. I slammed on my brakes, the tires screeching against the cracked asphalt. My heart pounded as I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. The figure, a young woman in a tattered white dress, remained motionless, her long, dark hair obscuring her face as she stared at the ground. Something felt wrong. Terribly wrong. The air inside my car suddenly turned cold, my breath escaping in visible puffs despite it being the middle of July. "Are you okay?" I called out, rolling down my window just an inch. No response. The radio, which had been playing softly in the background, dissolved into static. I reached to turn it off, and when I looked back up, she was gone. A wave of relief washed over me, though my hands still trembled. Maybe I was more tired than I thought, hallucinating after the long drive. I continued forward, approaching the infamous Hollow Creek Bridge. The wooden structure looked ancient, barely maintained, stretching across a deep ravine where a small river ran about 50 feet below. As my car rolled onto the creaking wood, the temperature dropped even further. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the roof of my car, gentle at first, like raindrops, but there wasn't a cloud in the night sky. The tapping grew more insistent, more rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. I accelerated, the bridge boards groaning beneath my tires. Then I heard it, a soft, melodic humming. A woman's voice coming from inside my car. The rearview mirror revealed nothing in the back seat, but the humming continued. An old lullaby, hauntingly familiar though I couldn't place it. My radio switched on by itself, cycling through stations of pure static. Halfway across the bridge, my engine sputtered and died. No, no, no. I turned the key repeatedly, but nothing happened. The digital clock on my dashboard flashed 2:17 a.m. before going dark along with all electrical systems. Complete silence enveloped me, save for the gentle rush of water far below and that persistent humming, now seeming to come from all directions. I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. The screen light illuminated the interior of my car, casting eerie shadows across the dashboard. That's when I noticed the water, small droplets forming on the inside of my windshield, running down in rivulets as if defying gravity. The humming grew louder. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The droplets on the windshield began to move with purpose, forming letters. "You're in my spot." My blood ran cold as I recalled the story I'd dismissed earlier that day at the local diner. July 17th, 1993, 2:17 a.m. A young woman named Sarah Winters drove off Hollow Creek Bridge after claiming for weeks that she was being followed by something no one else could see. Her car was found submerged in the creek, but her body was never recovered. The humming stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, I heard a whisper directly in my ear. "Move, or I'll make you move." I fumbled with the door handle, my fingers numb with cold and fear. As I flung the door open, I caught a glimpse of a pale face in the passenger window. Eyes black and hollow, skin bloated and blue, mouth stretched in an impossibly wide smile. I ran. The wooden planks of the bridge creaked beneath my feet as I sprinted toward the far end. Behind me, I heard my car door slam shut, followed by the engine roaring to life. Headlights blazed through the darkness, illuminating my escape path. When I reached solid ground, I turned back. My car sat motionless in the middle of the bridge, headlights still on, engine idling as if nothing had happened. Relief began to wash over me until I saw her, the woman in white, now sitting in the driver's seat of my car. Our eyes met across the distance, and even in the darkness, I could see her smile widen. My car lurched forward suddenly, tires squealing, heading straight toward me. I dove out of the way, rolling into the ditch beside the road. The vehicle sped past, continuing down Hollow Creek Road until the red taillights disappeared around a bend. I walked 8 miles back to town that night, jumping at every sound in the darkness. When I finally reached the sheriff's office at dawn and told my story, the deputy's face went pale. "That's the 17th car she's taken," he said quietly, "always on the anniversary." "But why let me go?" I asked, still shaking. The deputy slid a newspaper clipping across the desk. An old photograph showed the bridge from my nightmare and the recovered car of Sarah Winters. In the background, barely visible among the search party, was a face I recognized instantly. My own grandfather, much younger, looking directly at the camera. "She never takes the relatives of those who looked for her," the deputy explained. "She's still hoping someone will find her body after all these years." 3 days later, my car was discovered parked at the edge of Hollow Creek, 40 miles downstream from the bridge. The interior was completely dry except for the driver's seat, soaked through as if someone had emerged dripping from the water and sat there for hours. I sold that car the next day and vowed never to return to that town. But every year on July 17th, at exactly 2:17 a.m., my phone rings once with an unknown number. If I make the mistake of answering, there's only the sound of rushing water and a distant, familiar humming. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Dark Veil, and share your own bridge encounter stories in the comments below. 15 years as a night shift nurse at Oakwood Memorial Hospital had taught me to trust my instincts. Something was wrong with room 333. The monitors never worked properly. Equipment malfunctioned, and no patient assigned to that room lasted more than 3 days. They either improved mysteriously fast and transferred out, or they died unexpectedly during the night shift. My shift. It started with small things I could easily rationalize. Call buttons that didn't function, lights that flickered only in that room, the persistent chill that maintenance could never fix. But then I began finding the bed in different positions than how I'd left it. IV bags drained faster than medically possible, and most disturbing, patients reporting conversations with medical staff who weren't on duty. The doctor with the beard checked on me at 3 a.m. Mr. Collins told me one morning his condition remarkably improved after being at death's door the previous evening. "Doctor, Harrison doesn't work nights," I replied, feeling that familiar prickle at the back of my neck. "Not him." Mr. Collins shook his head. The older doctor, gray beard, glasses, wore an old-fashioned white coat. Very kind. Said he was checking my heart. There was no doctor matching that description at Oakwood Memorial. Not anymore. Not since Dr. Malcolm Reeves had died in 1983, in room 333, during a night shift. I pulled his file from the hospital archives, a dusty box in the basement storage where the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered ominously. Dr. Reeves had been a cardiologist, beloved by patients and staff alike. He'd suffered a sudden heart attack while checking on a critical patient, found slumped over in room 333 at 3:33 a.m. by the night nurse, my predecessor. That night, my patient in 333 was Mrs. Eleanor Garcia, 78, recovering from pneumonia, stable but weak. As I made my midnight rounds, I noticed her oxygen saturation was lower than ideal. I adjusted her flow rate and promised to check back soon. At 3:15 a.m., her monitor at the nurse's station flatlined, a common mechanical issue with this room. I grabbed my stethoscope and hurried down the hallway, noticing how the temperature seemed to drop with each step closer to 333. The door was closed, though I was certain I'd left it ajar. As I reached for the handle, I heard voices from inside, a man speaking softly, professionally, and Mrs. Garcia responding weakly. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the door. Deep breath in, the male voice instructed gently, and out. Good. My heart raced. There shouldn't be anyone in that room. Security was minimal at night, and we were short-staffed as usual. I pushed the door open. Mrs. Garcia lay sleeping peacefully, alone, her oxygen levels now perfect according to the bedside monitor that had supposedly failed. The room was empty, but colder than the hallway by at least 10 degrees. The scent of old-fashioned aftershave, sandalwood, and spice lingered in the air. "Mrs. Garcia," I whispered, approaching her bed and checking her vitals manually. Strong and steady, much improved from earlier. Her eyes fluttered open. "Did the doctor send you to check on me too?" she asked sleepily. "Which doctor?" My mouth went dry. "The nice older gentleman with the beard. He said my heart rhythm was finally stabilizing." She smiled and drifted back to sleep. I backed out of the room, my hands trembling as I made notes on her chart. When I returned to the nurse's station, I pulled up the hospital's security camera feed for room 333 on the ancient monitor we kept behind the desk. The timestamp read 3:33 a.m. as I watched myself enter the room, check Mrs. Garcia, and leave. Nothing unusual, except there, in the corner of the frame, for just a second as the door closed behind me, a white coat sleeve and a hand that couldn't possibly have been there. I requested a transfer to day shift the next morning. My supervisor denied it. Too short-staffed, she explained. That night, I was assigned a new patient in room 333, Jonathan Mercer, 62, recovering from heart surgery, stable condition. As I entered his room for the first time, the lights flickered briefly. "Happens all the time," the day nurse told me during handover. "Maintenance can't figure it out." The night progressed normally until 3:15 a.m., when I felt an inexplicable urge to check on Mr. Mercer, despite having just seen him 30 minutes earlier. As I approached room 333, I heard that same voice. Calm, clinical, male. "Your bypass is healing nicely, but there's an irregularity we need to address immediately." This time, I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open forcefully. The room was cold enough to see my breath, but Mr. Mercer was alone, sleeping soundly. His heart monitor showed a perfectly normal rhythm. As I checked his vitals, my stethoscope caught something odd, a murmur that hadn't been noted in his chart. Very subtle, but definitely there. The kind of thing that could cause complications if left untreated. I called the on-call cardiologist, who arrived reluctantly at 4 a.m. His examination confirmed my finding, a developing issue that hadn't been present during earlier examinations. "Good catch," he mumbled, ordering additional medication. This could have gotten serious in a day or two. The pattern continued for months. Patients in room 333 either made remarkable recoveries or died suddenly, no in between. I started keeping a journal, documenting the phenomena. Security footage occasionally showed anomalies, shadows where there shouldn't be any, equipment moving slightly on its own, and once, a clear handprint appearing on a fogged bathroom mirror. Then came the night that changed everything. Sarah Reeves, 76, was admitted with heart failure. Her last name caught my attention immediately. When I checked her information, my suspicions were confirmed. The widow of Dr. Malcolm Reeves, the cardiologist who had died in room 333. She had specifically requested that room, claiming it was where her husband had saved many lives. Hospital administration, unaware of my concerns and documentation, had granted her wish. When I arrived for my shift, she was already settled in, surrounded by old photographs, including one of her late husband in his white coat, gray-bearded with wire-rimmed glasses. "He was the best of us," she told me when she caught me staring at the photograph. "Always said he had more work to do." That night, I decided to stay near room 333. I pulled a chair into the hallway, pretending to catch up on paperwork. The hours ticked by: midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Mrs. Reeves slept peacefully, her condition neither improving nor deteriorating. At 3:15 a.m., the hallway grew noticeably colder. The lights dimmed slightly, though they didn't flicker as usual. I stood up, my chest tight with anticipation or fear. I couldn't tell which. The door to room 333 remained closed, but I heard them clearly. Two voices engaged in conversation. "Malcolm?" Mrs. Reeves's voice was stronger than it had been all day. "Is it really you? I've been waiting for you, Sarah." The male voice was gentle, filled with emotion I hadn't heard in its previous clinical tones. "It's time to fix your heart." I should have entered immediately, but something held me back. This wasn't like the other encounters. This felt personal, private, sacred even. I waited, counting the seconds until 3:33 a.m. exactly. Then I opened the door. Sarah Reeves lay peacefully in her bed, a serene smile on her face. Her monitor showed a flat line, the alarm mysteriously silenced. The room was the coldest I'd ever felt it, my breath forming thick clouds in the air. The scent of sandalwood aftershave was overwhelming. As I moved to check her pulse, a formality, I knew she was gone, I saw something on the small table beside her bed. The photograph of Dr. Reeves was changed. Where before he had stood alone, now a transparent female figure stood beside him, her hand in his, her face unmistakably Sarah's, though decades younger than the woman who lay before me. I reported her death, went through the standard procedures, answered the routine questions. Natural causes, expected outcome given her condition. No one questioned it. After my shift ended, I returned to room 333 one last time. The room had been cleared of Mrs. Reeves's belongings, prepped for the next patient. It felt different, warmer, the lights steady and bright. "Thank you," I said softly to the empty room, "for saving the ones you could." I transferred to the maternity ward the following week. No one took my place on the night shift for room 333. The position remained unfilled for months until the hospital eventually converted the room to storage space, citing electrical issues. Years later, when the old hospital was finally demolished, I attended the ceremony. As the wrecking ball struck the wing containing room 333, several workers reported seeing an elderly couple walking hand in hand across the parking lot. The man in an old-fashioned white coat before disappearing into the morning mist. Sometimes medicine can't explain everything. Sometimes healing comes from beyond our understanding. And sometimes doctors never really stop practicing, even after death. If this story gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Dark Veil for more true hospital horror stories. Share your own experiences in the comments below. I never should have opened that email. Subject line: beta testers needed for revolutionary predictive algorithm. Normally, I'd delete such obvious spam, but two things caught my attention. It addressed me by name, and the sender was Dr. Victor Lem, my former AI professor whose brilliant mind had earned him both academic acclaim and a notorious reputation for ethical flexibility. Dear Marcus, the email read, your unique combination of programming expertise and psychological background makes you the ideal candidate for testing my newest creation. The algorithm predicts human behavior with unprecedented accuracy. If interested, download the attached application. Compensation: $10,000 for 2 weeks of testing. Confidentiality agreement required. $10,000 would solve my immediate financial problems: 3 months behind on rent, crushing student loans, and a refrigerator containing only hot sauce packets and a questionable carton of milk. I downloaded the application without hesitation. Installation was seamless, the interface deceptively simple. A minimalist black screen with green text, reminiscent of early computing. The welcome message was brief. Thank you for participating. The algorithm is now calibrating to your behavioral patterns. Please use your computer normally. Predictions will appear in this window. I expected some kind of questionnaire or setup process, but nothing happened. I shrugged, minimized the window, and continued my evening routine, checking social media, browsing job listings, watching streaming videos. I almost forgot about the algorithm until a notification sound drew my attention back to the application window. Green text appeared. You will check your email in approximately 3 minutes, hoping for a response from Meridian Technologies regarding your job application submitted last Tuesday. No email will have arrived. A chill ran down my spine. I had indeed applied to Meridian Technologies the previous Tuesday, and I had been planning to check my email soon. Coincidence, surely. The program must have accessed my browser history or email metadata. 3 minutes later, I found myself opening my email client, specifically looking for a response from Meridian. Nothing new had arrived, just as predicted. Interesting trick, I muttered, returning to the application window. A new message awaited me. You will say interesting trick upon confirming the prediction's accuracy. At 9:47 p.m., your neighbor in apartment 4B will play music too loudly. You will knock on their wall 3 times before resorting to noise-canceling headphones. The timestamp on the prediction, 9:39 p.m. Current time, 9:40 p.m. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. This was impossible. The algorithm couldn't know what my neighbor would do, unless it wasn't predicting but somehow causing these events. At exactly 9:47 p.m., the heavy bass of hip-hop music began thumping through my wall. I jumped, startled not by the noise but by the precision of the prediction. This couldn't be a coincidence. I found myself standing, walking to the wall, raising my fist. I stopped. If I knocked 3 times, exactly as predicted, what would that mean? Was I proving the algorithm right, or was I being manipulated into fulfilling its prediction? The music continued, pulsing through my small apartment. My hand remained frozen mid-air. Then, deliberately, I knocked 4 times instead of 3. I returned to my computer, a small surge of triumph washing over me. The green text had changed. Deviation noted. You knocked 4 times instead of 3, believing this would invalidate the prediction. This reaction was anticipated with 78% probability. You will still use noise-canceling headphones within the next 11 minutes. My mouth went dry. I closed the laptop, suddenly desperate to break whatever observational loop I had entered. I grabbed my keys and jacket, determined to leave the apartment entirely rather than use my headphones as predicted. As I reached for the door, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Running away won't help, Marcus. The algorithm adapts." I froze, key in the lock, a wave of nausea washing over me. How was this possible? I slowly returned to my laptop and opened it. The green text continued. "Your attempt to leave was predicted with 91% probability. Tomorrow at 10:23 a.m. you will receive a rejection email from Meridian Technologies. At 11:47 a.m. you will purchase coffee from the Daily Grind. The barista will misspell your name as Marcos. You will not correct her." I slept poorly that night, the music eventually stopping on its own. I never used my headphones. A small victory, but one that felt hollow in the face of the algorithm's apparent adaptation to my resistance. The next morning, I considered not checking my email at all, not going for coffee, doing anything to break the predictions. But curiosity and a stubborn desire to prove the algorithm wrong drove me to my laptop at precisely 10:20 a.m. I refreshed my inbox at 10:23 a.m. A new email appeared from Meridian Technologies. "Thank you for your interest, but we have decided to pursue other candidates." My breath caught in my throat. I slammed the laptop closed and paced my small apartment, thoughts racing. This was beyond coincidence, beyond data mining or psychological profiling. The algorithm wasn't just predicting events, it seemed to be orchestrating them. At 11:30 a.m., hungry and desperate for caffeine, I decided to grab breakfast from anywhere except the Daily Grind. I walked 6 blocks in the opposite direction to an independent cafe I'd never visited before. As I waited in line, my phone died suddenly despite being fully charged that morning. The person ahead of me finished ordering, and as I approached the counter, I noticed the nameplate, Margaret, transferred from the Daily Grind. My blood ran cold. "What can I get you?" she asked cheerfully. "Medium coffee, black," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Name for the order?" "Marcus." When she handed me the cup, the name scrawled on the side read Marcos. I returned to my apartment in a daze, the coffee untouched in my trembling hand. My laptop screen glowed in the dimness of my studio apartment. The black window with green text waiting. Probability of you attempting to evade prediction by visiting Cafe Lustra instead of the Daily Grind, 85%. Barista Margaret Thompson began working there yesterday after transferring from the Daily Grind. Prediction fulfilled with acceptable parameters. I should have uninstalled the application then. I should have contacted Dr. Lem and demanded answers. Instead, a morbid fascination took hold. How far could this go? What were the limits of the prediction capabilities? I began testing it deliberately, making random decisions, flipping coins to determine my actions, using random number generators to choose where to go or what to do. The algorithm adapted each time. Your use of randomization tools was predicted with 93% accuracy. True randomness is unachievable by human minds seeking to evade pattern recognition. Days passed in this strange psychological battle. The predictions became more personal, more specific. Tonight, you will dream of your father for the first time in 3 years. In the dream, he will apologize for leaving. You will wake at 3:17 a.m. and cry for approximately 6 minutes. I did dream of my father that night. He did apologize. I did wake up and check the time. 3:17 a.m. exactly. The tears came unbidden, and I made no attempt to time them, but when they stopped, I checked again. 6 minutes had passed. The algorithm began predicting events beyond my control. Weather changes, news headlines, stock market fluctuations. Then it started predicting other people's behaviors toward me. Your ex-girlfriend Elise will contact you tomorrow at 2:14 p.m., claiming to have found an old sweater of yours while moving. This is a pretext. She actually wants to assess whether reconciliation is possible. It is not. When Elise texted at exactly 2:14 p.m. the next day, I turned off my phone in panic. The implications were becoming too terrifying. Either the algorithm had godlike predictive capabilities, or it was somehow influencing events around me on a scale I couldn't comprehend. On day 12 of the testing period, I received an email from Dr. Lem. Marcus, your testing data is exceptional. The algorithm shows a 99.4% accuracy rate with your cohort. However, we've noticed signs of psychological distress in your behavior patterns. Remember, the algorithm predicts, it does not control. Perception of control is an illusion created by the human mind when confronted with accurate prediction models. Your final task: the algorithm will present you with 3 possible actions for tomorrow. Choose one. Payment will be processed regardless of completion. When I opened the application, 3 options appeared. 1. Delete this application and tell no one about your experience. 2. Contact reporter Jamie Weiss at the technology blog Tech Frontier about your experience. 3. Visit Dr. Lem's laboratory at 342 Riverside Drive, basement level, for a full explanation. A countdown clock appeared. 24 hours to decide. I researched obsessively throughout the night. Jamie Weiss was real, a technology reporter known for exposés on unethical tech practices. The address existed, an abandoned research building formerly associated with the university. As the hours ticked by, I became convinced that the algorithm wasn't just predicting behavior, but subtly influencing it, pushing psychological buttons so precisely that the subject felt they were making free choices while actually following an invisible script. With 1 hour remaining on the countdown, I made my decision. I would choose none of the options presented. Instead, I wrote a detailed account of my experience and scheduled it to be automatically emailed to 5 different technology journalists, including Jamie Weiss, and 3 ethics professors if I didn't enter a cancellation code every 24 hours. Then I selected option 3, visit Dr. Lem's laboratory. The basement was dimly lit, humming with server equipment. Dr. Lem sat alone at a workstation, looking older than I remembered, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. "Marcus?" He nodded as if he'd been expecting me. "I predicted you'd choose option 3. "Did the algorithm tell you that?" I asked. "There is no algorithm," he replied, gesturing to the screens around him. "Not as you understand it." He explained that the test subjects themselves were the algorithm. 25 people, selected for specific psychological profiles, each thinking they were testing predictive software. In reality, their combined choices, influenced by carefully crafted suggestions, created the data set that powered what he called the behavioral consensus engine. By analyzing how multiple similar personalities react to identical stimuli, we can predict behavior with remarkable accuracy, Dr. Lem explained. Then we feed those predictions back to the subjects, creating a self-reinforcing loop. The predictions become more accurate as subjects unconsciously align their behavior with expectations. But Elise's text, the barista, the dream about my father? Dr. Lem smiled thinly. Basic psychological prompts coupled with timing algorithms. We didn't know you would dream of your father, but mentioning him activated your subconscious. As for Elise, We've been monitoring your communications. A simple, anonymous suggestion that she might reach out to you was all it took. Humans are remarkably susceptible to subtle guidance. I felt sick. That's manipulation, not prediction. The line between them is thinner than most would admit, Dr. Lem replied. Now, about your dead man switch email to those journalists. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told him about that. His smile widened. Predictable. So predictable. You'll find your email account has been locked for suspicious activity. A security measure from your provider. I checked my phone. He was right. What happens now? I asked, fighting rising panic. Now? Dr. Lem gestured to a contract on the table. You sign an enhanced confidentiality agreement and receive $50,000 instead of the promised $10,000. The security world is very interested in our consensus prediction engine. And if I refuse, the algorithm predicts you won't, he said simply. I took a deep breath, thinking of the implications of this technology in the hands of corporations, governments, or worse. I thought about free will and manipulation, about the invisible strings that might already be pulling at all of us. Then I did something truly unpredictable. Well, that would be telling, wouldn't it? Let's just say, Doctor, Lem's algorithm didn't account for certain variables in my psychology. Variables I didn't know existed until pushed to my limit. The algorithm is still out there, in some form. Maybe you're part of it right now. Your behavior being tracked, predicted, subtly guided. Maybe this very story was predicted as the optimal way to prepare you for what comes next. Check your email. Has someone you haven't heard from in years suddenly reached out? Look at your coffee cup. Is your name spelled correctly? Are your choices truly your own? If you enjoyed this psychological horror story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The algorithm predicts you will. They called it the backwards house, a Victorian monstrosity at the end of Mulberry Lane that had stood empty for decades. From the outside, it looked like any other neglected manor. Peel-in paint, overgrown garden, windows like vacant eyes staring out at the neighborhood. But those who had been inside whispered about impossible architecture, rooms that shouldn't exist, and doorways that led somewhere else. As the new real estate agent assigned to finally sell the property, I assumed these stories were simply local folklore designed to explain why the house had remained on the market for so long. The truth, I figured, was more mundane. Foundation issues, asbestos, or black mold. Nothing that a substantial renovation budget couldn't fix. The first red flag should have been the previous listing agent's reaction when I told him I'd be taken over. "Good luck," he said, his face unnaturally pale. "Don't stay after sunset, and whatever you do, don't go upstairs backwards." He quit the agency the next day and moved to another state. I dismissed his warning as the ramblings of someone who'd clearly had a mental breakdown. The property's file was unusually thin. No floor plans, minimal photographs, and inspection reports that seemed deliberately vague. Previous potential buyers had all withdrawn their offers without explanation. My first visit to the backwards house was on a bright Tuesday morning. Sunlight cut through the dusty air as I entered the grand foyer, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Everything seemed normal, if neglected. Crown molding, ornate banister, crystal chandelier draped in cobwebs. The typical abandoned Victorian aesthetic. The ground floor was unremarkable. Living room, dining room, library, kitchen, all proportioned as expected. Dusty furniture from various eras suggested multiple owners, none of whom had bothered to clear out their predecessors' belongings. The only oddity was that all the clocks were running counterclockwise, which I attributed to some electrical quirk or prank from local teenagers. Then I reached the staircase, an elegant spiral of dark wood that curved up to the second floor. As I placed my foot on the first step, a wave of vertigo washed over me. The air felt suddenly thick, resistant, as if I were trying to walk through water. I gripped the banister and continued upward, the sensation intensifying with each step. At the top, a long hallway stretched before me, lined with doors on both sides. According to the county records, the house should have had 4 bedrooms upstairs. I counted 7 doors. Still, old houses often had quirks that weren't reflected in official documentation. The first bedroom appeared normal. Large windows, 4-poster bed, antique dresser. But as I turned to leave, something felt off. The doorway I'd entered through now seemed reversed. I shook my head, blaming the disorienting effect on the dust and poor lighting. The second room was a bathroom, fixtures decades old but intact. As I checked the water pressure, I caught my reflection in the mirror above the sink. For a split second, I could have sworn my reflection moved a moment before I did, as if anticipating my actions. The third door opened to reveal a bedroom that couldn't possibly exist. The windows looked out on a garden that wasn't there, a manicured landscape of topiary and fountains instead of the overgrown disaster I'd seen from outside. And the room itself was too large, extending far beyond where the exterior wall of the house should be. Architectural illusion, I muttered, trying to calm my racing heart. Old houses used mirrors and clever design to create impressions of larger spaces. That's all this was. The fourth door was locked. The fifth opened into what appeared to be a child's nursery, though the toys and furniture were from the 1890s. A weathered rocking horse, a porcelain doll with a cracked face, a music box that began to play on its own as I entered. The melody was familiar but distorted, as if played in reverse. I decided to skip the remaining doors and complete my inventory of the house another day. As I turned back toward the staircase, I realized I couldn't remember which direction I'd come from. Both ends of the hallway looked identical now, stretching much farther than they had when I'd arrived. I chose a direction and walked, my footsteps muffled on the faded carpet. The hallway seemed to extend as I moved, more doors appearing ahead of me. When I looked back, the hallway behind me had shortened, doors disappearing as if swallowed by the walls. Panic rose in my throat. I broke into a run, throwing open doors at random. A Victorian operating theater, a ballroom filled with mannequins frozen mid-dance, a library where all the books were blank, an exact replica of the foyer I'd entered through but upside down, with furniture adhered to the ceiling. I slammed the last door shut and leaned against it, breathing heavily. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Hallucinations from toxic mold, elaborate hoax by local teenagers, or my own mind buckling under the stress of a new job and divorce. But none of those explanations accounted for what I was experiencing. When I finally oriented myself and found the staircase again, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the windows. I checked my watch. I'd been inside for nearly 6 hours, though it had felt like less than 1. I hurried down the stairs, desperate to exit before darkness fell completely. As I reached the bottom step, something made me turn back. Through the balustrade, I could see the upstairs hallway clearly, but now it was inverted, the ceiling becoming the floor, doors opening downward into empty space. A chandelier that hadn't been there before now protruded upward from what should have been the floor. I ran for the front door, yanked it open, and burst outside into the twilight. My car sat where I'd left it, a comforting symbol of normality. I didn't return to the office that day. Instead, I drove straight home, poured myself a large whiskey, and tried to convince myself I'd experienced some kind of stress-induced episode. That night, I dreamt of endless hallways and doors that led nowhere and everywhere. In the dream, my reflection stepped out of a mirror and whispered, "You have to walk backwards to go forwards." The next morning, determined to prove to myself that I had imagined the impossible architecture, I returned to the backwards house. This time, I brought a colleague, Derek, and a floor plan I'd sketched from memory. "Quite the fixer-upper," Derek commented as we entered the foyer. I watched him closely, looking for signs of the disorientation I'd felt. He seemed perfectly at ease, whistling as he examined the crown molding and commented on the property's good bones. The ground floor was exactly as I remembered it. Dusty, but normal. But when we reached the staircase, Derek frowned. "That's odd," he said, pointing to my sketch. "You have this as a spiral staircase, but it's clearly a straight one." I stared at the staircase in disbelief. He was right. Where yesterday there had been an elegant spiral, today there was a conventional straight staircase with a landing halfway up. "Must have misremembered," I muttered, though we both knew that was unlikely. "Let's check upstairs." The second floor was nothing like what I'd experienced the day before. Instead of a long hallway with numerous doors, there were exactly 4 bedrooms arranged around a central sitting area, just as the county records indicated. No impossible gardens, no Victorian operating theater, no upside-down rooms. "Seems pretty standard to me," Derek shrugged. "Needs updating, but structurally sound." I insisted on checking each room thoroughly, looking for hidden doors or signs of the strangeness I'd witnessed. Nothing. By the time we finished the inspection, I was beginning to doubt my own memory of the previous day. As we headed back downstairs, Derek received a phone call and stepped outside to take it. Alone again, I paused on the landing, staring back up at the second floor. Had I imagined everything? That's when I noticed it. A small, antique hand mirror lying on the windowsill of the landing. I picked it up, examining its tarnished silver back and ornate handle. When I turned it over to look at my reflection, I froze. The mirror didn't show my face. Instead, it showed the spiral staircase I remembered from yesterday, and at the top, a figure that looked like me, staring down with an expression of confusion identical to what I must have been wearing in that moment. I dropped the mirror in shock. It should have shattered on the hardwood floor, but instead, it passed through the solid surface as if the floor were water, disappearing without a trace. When Derek returned, I suggested we leave immediately, making up an excuse about another appointment. He gave me an odd look, but didn't argue. That night, I scoured the internet for information about the backwards house. Most results were standard real estate listings with minimal details. But on a local paranormal forum, I found a thread dedicated to the house, with posts dating back decades. One user, Realtor Survived 1978, had written a lengthy account of their experience that chilled me to the bone. The house exists in 2 states simultaneously. What you see depends on whether you're alone and how you move through it. If you walk backwards through a doorway, you enter the reverse's version of the house, the version that exists in some other dimension. Each time previous owners have tried to renovate, the workers would find that changes made one day would be undone the next, or worse, inverted somehow. The longer you stay, the more the house remembers you, and the harder it becomes to leave permanently. Another post from historian J provided context. Built in 1887 by Ambrose Blackwood, an architect obsessed with non-Euclidean geometry and dimensional theory. Local legend says he discovered something while traveling in Europe, some mathematical principle that shouldn't work in our reality. The house was his attempt to create a junction between dimensions. Blackwood disappeared 3 years after completing the house. His journal was found in the upstairs study with a final entry that read only, "To go forward, one must walk backwards." I closed my laptop, my mind racing. Part of me still believed there had to be a rational explanation: gas leaks, hallucinogenic mold, or some elaborate prank. But another part knew what I had seen was real. The next day, I returned alone, armed with a video camera, compass, and chalk to mark my path. I needed evidence, something to prove to myself and others that I wasn't losing my mind. The house appeared normal as I entered. The straight staircase, the 4 bedrooms, everything as Derek and I had seen it. I meticulously filmed each room, narrating measurements and details for the record. When I reached the master bedroom, I noticed something I had missed during previous visits: a full-length mirror mounted on the wall. Unlike the other dusty furnishings, this mirror was immaculate, its surface gleaming in the afternoon light. In the reflection, I could see the bedroom behind me, but slightly different. The bedspread in the reflection was blue, while the actual one was green. A painting hung on the reflected wall that wasn't present in the real room. "The mirror shows the other version," I whispered, the realization dawning on me. I lifted the camera to capture this discovery. That's when I remembered the forum post. If you walk backwards through a doorway, you enter the reverse version of the house. Before I could reconsider, I positioned myself in front of the mirror and began walking backwards slowly toward the bedroom door, watching my reflection do the same. As I crossed the threshold in reverse, the air thickened around me. A wave of vertigo washed over me and I closed my eyes momentarily. When I opened them, I was still in the doorway of the master bedroom, but everything had changed. The spiral staircase was visible through the window. The hallway before me now stretched endlessly, lined with countless doors. My heart raced with equal parts fear and vindication. I continued filming as I explored this reverse version of the house. The impossible rooms had returned: the Victorian operating theater, the upside-down foyer, the room with windows looking out on a garden that couldn't exist. But there were new rooms too. A chamber where water flowed upward from a fountain into the ceiling. A dining room where elaborate place settings were arranged on the walls rather than the table. A conservatory filled with plants that moved like animals, turning to watch me as I passed. In one room, I found an old desk with papers scattered across its surface. Among them was a journal bound in faded leather, Ambrose Blackwood's missing journal. I opened it with trembling hands, the camera still recording. The journal detailed Blackwood's discovery of what he called dimensional inversion, a mathematical principle that, when applied to architecture, created spaces that existed simultaneously in multiple realities. The house was his masterpiece, designed to exist in our world and somewhere else at the same time. The final pages contained diagrams and equations, along with increasingly frantic entries. The house is changing on its own now. Rooms appear that I never designed. Sometimes I wake to find myself in a version of my bedroom that isn't quite right. Subtle differences that only I would notice. Yesterday, I encountered myself in the hallway, but it wasn't me. It looked at me with my own eyes but didn't recognize me. The last entry was exactly as the form had described. To go forward, one must walk backwards. To return, one must never look back. I closed the journal, a cold certainty settling over me. To escape this version of the house, I needed to walk backwards again, but I couldn't look behind me during the process. As I prepared to attempt this, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps that matched my own walking rhythm perfectly. I raised the camera, pointing it toward the sound. In the viewfinder, I saw myself walking toward me, but not quite myself. This doppelganger wore the clothes I had worn yesterday, and its movements were slightly out of sync, as if delayed by seconds. It raised a camera identical to mine, filming me as I filmed it. I backed away slowly, keeping the camera between us like a shield. My double stopped, its head tilting with unnatural precision. Then it smiled. A smile I recognized as my own but had never seen from the outside. "You have to go backwards to go forwards," it said, its voice a distorted version of mine, the words seeming to reach my ears before its lips finished moving. I turned and ran, abandoning my plan to exit backwards, driven by pure instinct. Behind me, I heard my double's footsteps, perfectly matching my pace but always slightly out of rhythm, like an echo that arrives too quickly. Doors flew past as I ran down the impossible hallway that stretched and contracted with each step. I reached the top of the spiral staircase and practically threw myself down it, nearly falling in my haste. At the bottom, I sprinted for the front door. As my hand touched the doorknob, everything went silent. The pursuing footsteps stopped. I turned, unable to resist looking back. The foyer was empty. The staircase had transformed back into the straight one with a landing. Everything appeared normal, the standard version of the house that Derek and I had toured. Relief washed over me as I pulled open the front door, only to find myself staring at another hallway, identical to the one I had just fled. I had gone in a circle somehow, despite running in a straight line for the exit. I slammed the door shut, trying to control my breathing. The house wasn't letting me leave. I checked my watch. The sun would set in less than an hour. I had to get out before dark, remembering the previous agent's warning never to stay after sunset. The journal's instructions echoed in my mind. To return, one must never look back. I had looked back at the bottom of the stairs, breaking the rule. Now I had to start over. I forced myself to think logically. If the house existed in two overlapping states, perhaps the exit did too. I needed to find the junction point, the place where both versions of the house connected to the outside world. As if in response to my realization, a door appeared on the wall to my right. A door I was certain hadn't been there seconds ago. It was old, made of dark wood with a tarnished brass knob shaped like a twisted face locked in a silent scream. With no other options, I opened it. Beyond was a narrow corridor that shouldn't have fit within the house's dimensions, stretching seemingly endlessly into darkness. On the walls were mirrors, hundreds of them, each reflecting a slightly different version of me. In some, I was younger, in others, older. In some, I wore different clothes or had different hairstyles. In one, my reflection had no eyes. I began walking backward down this corridor of mirrors, careful never to look directly behind me. As I moved, the reflections changed, becoming more distorted, less human. I kept my eyes fixed on a point ahead of me, or rather behind me as I walked, focusing on maintaining a straight path. After what felt like hours but may have been minutes, my back pressed against something solid. A door. Without turning around, I reached behind me, feeling for a knob or handle. My fingers closed around cold metal, and I turned it, still facing the corridor of mirrors. Fresh air washed over me as the door opened. Still moving backwards, I stepped out, feeling gravel beneath my feet instead of hardwood. Only when I'd taken several steps away from the house did I allow myself to turn around. I stood in the driveway, facing the backwards house. It looked perfectly normal in the fading light, just an old Victorian in need of renovation. My car sat where I'd parked it hours earlier. The front door was closed, though I had just supposedly exited through it. As I watched, a figure appeared in an upstairs window. My figure, camera raised, filming me from above. I raised my hand experimentally. The figure did not mimic the gesture. I checked my own camera, hoping I had captured evidence of the impossible architecture. The screen showed no memory card. I was certain I had inserted one before entering the house. That was 3 weeks ago. I've since resigned from the real estate agency, citing health reasons. The backwards house remains on the market, assigned to a new agent who has already reported strange experiences. Clocks running counterclockwise, rooms that seem to rearrange themselves, glimpses of someone who looks like me wandering the upstairs hallway. I've tried to warn them, but who would believe such a story? Sometimes I catch my reflection moving a moment before I do. Sometimes I wake up in my bedroom to find subtle differences. The nightstand on the wrong side, the window facing east instead of west. And sometimes, in dreams, I'm still walking those endless hallways, opening doors to impossible rooms, being watched by another version of myself that smiles too widely and whispers, "To go forward, one must walk backwards." I never look in mirrors anymore. I'm afraid of what might be looking back, and whether it would be me at all. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your theories about the backwards house in the comments. What would you do if you found yourself trapped between dimensions? The locals called it Blackwood. 5 square miles of ancient forest that somehow remained untouched despite the encroaching suburbs of Millfield. As the town's newest forest ranger, I was warned about it during my first day on the job. "Stay on the marked trails in Blackwood," my supervisor cautioned, not quite meeting my eyes. "Some folks who wander off, well, they come back different, if they come back at all." I dismissed it as the usual hazing of newcomers. Every small town had its local legends, its forbidden places wrapped in superstition. Having worked in national parks across 3 states, I'd heard it all. Haunted caves, cursed mountains, lakes with monsters lurking in their depths. Nature inspired fear in those who didn't understand it, and fear bred stories. Still, I couldn't help noticing how the other rangers avoided Blackwood when possible, always patrolling in pairs when they couldn't. Trail maintenance in that section was consistently behind schedule. Incident reports from the area were filed with vague descriptions and hasty conclusions. My curiosity grew with each passing week. The forest itself was beautiful. Massive oak and pine trees, some likely centuries old, forming a dense canopy that filtered sunlight into ethereal beams. The underbrush was lush but not impenetrable, the ground soft with decades of fallen leaves. Wildlife seemed abundant, yet strangely silent. I never heard the chatter of squirrels or the songs of birds when patrolling Blackwood, though I occasionally glimpsed movement from the corner of my eye. It was during my 3rd month, on a routine patrol checking for storm damage, that I first heard the whispering. The day had been perfectly normal. Clear blue October sky, crisp autumn air carrying the scent of pine and decay. I had just finished marking a fallen tree for removal when the breeze stopped abruptly. The forest fell into an unnatural stillness, the kind that makes the hairs on your neck stand at attention. At first, I thought it was just leaves rustling, or perhaps the distant conversation of hikers. But as I listened, the sound resolved into something more deliberate. Whispers just below the threshold of comprehension, like dozens of voices having urgent, hushed conversations. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees around me. Nothing moved. The whispering continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding flat and muffled in the dense air. "Anyone there?" The whispering stopped instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse, expectant, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. I checked my GPS. According to the display, I was still on the marked trail, though I didn't recognize this particular section. The path ahead disappeared around a bend, framed by two massive oaks that seemed to lean toward each other, forming a natural archway. As a ranger with a decade of wilderness experience, I'd developed a finely tuned sense for danger, the instinctual awareness that keeps experienced outdoorsmen alive. Everything in me was screaming to turn back, to return to the ranger station and end my patrol early. Instead, I continued forward, passing under the arch of ancient oaks. The moment I stepped through, the air changed, became thicker, heavier with moisture and the rich smell of earth after rain, though it hadn't rained for weeks. The whispering returned, louder now, more insistent. I still couldn't make out individual words, but the tone had shifted from urgent to welcoming, almost coaxing. The trail ahead no longer matched my map. According to GPS, I should be approaching a small footbridge over a seasonal creek. Instead, the path wound deeper into increasingly dense forest, the trees growing closer together, older and more gnarled with each step. I stopped, consulting my compass. The needle spun lazily, settling briefly in one direction before rotating again, as if confused. My radio emitted only static when I tried to contact the station. The logical response would have been to turn around to retrace my steps back through the oak archway. But something about those whispers, now taking on an almost melodic quality, compelled me forward. Just a little farther, I told myself, just to see what was around the next bend. The forest grew darker as I walked, though my watch showed it was only mid-afternoon. The canopy above had become so dense that only occasional shafts of light penetrated, illuminating swirling motes of dust and pollen in the stagnant air. After 20 minutes of walking, I reached a clearing I'd never seen before, despite having studied every map of the park. At its center stood a perfect circle of white mushrooms, a fairy ring, folklore would call it, surrounding a single stump of what must have been an enormous tree, cut flush to the ground decades or perhaps centuries ago. The whispering was loudest here, rising and falling like waves against a shore. As I approached the stump, individual words began to separate from the sonic soup. Stay, home, finally, ours. My training and experience were at war with my curiosity. Part of me recognized the danger signs: disorientation, auditory hallucinations, lost time. These could indicate anything from toxic spores to gas pockets to my own fatigue. But another part, a deeper, more primitive part, sensed that something truly extraordinary was happening. I stepped into the fairy ring. The whispers surged, becoming a chorus of distinct voices speaking over each other. Lost so long, one of us. The forest remembers, blood in the roots, never alone again. My head swam, vision blurring at the edges. I stumbled forward, dropping to my knees beside the massive stump. Up close, I could see that what I had taken for natural wood grain was actually intricate carving. Symbols and pictographs spiraling from the outer edge toward the center in a hypnotic pattern. They seemed to shift and move as I stared, rearranging themselves like living things. I placed my palm flat against the surface of the stump. The wood was warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The whispers synchronized into a single voice, gentle, feminine, ancient, speaking directly into my mind. We've waited for one who could hear us. The others come, but they do not listen. Who are you? I whispered aloud, my own voice sounded foreign to my ears. We are Blackwood, the voice replied. We are the ones who remain, the ones who remember, the ones who were bound. Images flooded my mind, flashes of history seen through inhuman eyes. Native tribes performing rituals among these same trees, European settlers with axes and fear in their hearts. A circle of hooded figures surrounding this very stump, chanting by torchlight as they drove a blade deep into living wood. They tried to end us, the voice continued, cut down our heart and bound us with iron and blood and words of power, but roots run deep. We survived, fragmented, whispering, waiting for someone to hear. My training screamed at me to leave, to run. This was exactly the kind of delusion that preceded cases of wilderness psychosis, when isolated hikers became convinced that the forest was sentient, communicating with them, before they wandered off to die of exposure or dehydration. I tried to pull my hand away from the stump, but my muscles wouldn't respond. Tendrils of fungal growth had emerged from the wood, wrapping gently around my wrist, not restraining, but connecting. You're different, the whispers observed. Your ancestors knew us, respected us. The knowledge sleeps in your blood. More images flickered through my mind. My grandmother, whose love of forests had inspired my career choice, walking these same woods decades ago. I saw her kneeling at this very stump, listening, understanding. I had never known she'd lived in Millfield, yet here she was in my vision, young and aware of the whispering forest. What do you want from me? I asked, fear mixing with a strange sense of wonder. To remember, to help us remember. Each human life is so brief, but together we preserve what would otherwise be lost. Become our ranger in truth, walk between worlds, listen to our stories, and in exchange, we will show you wonders no other human has seen. The fungal tendrils released my wrist, retreating back into the stump. I sat back, head spinning with impossible knowledge and choices. You may leave, the whispers said. Return to your concrete paths and measured time. Or you may stay and learn. The choice must be yours. I stood on shaking legs, backing away from the stump. The moment I stepped outside the fairy ring, the whispers faded to their previous indistinct murmur. Finding my way back should have been impossible. I had no breadcrumb trail, my compass still malfunctioned, and my GPS showed only static. Yet somehow my feet knew the way, leading me unerringly back to the arch of ancient oaks. As I passed beneath them, the air thinned, sounds returning to normal. Distant bird calls, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I emerged onto the main trail exactly where I had left it, though my watch showed that 3 hours had passed in what had felt like minutes. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those carvings on the stump, shifting and changing. I heard the whispers, now seemingly coming from the houseplants in my small apartment. When I finally drifted off near dawn, I dreamed of roots spreading beneath the town of Millfield, connecting everything to the heart of Blackwood. I told no one about my experience. Who would believe me? Instead, I began researching the history of the forest. The local historical society had surprisingly little information, as if Blackwood's past had been deliberately obscured. But in the county records, I found references to a logging operation in the 1880s that had attempted to clear the area. The operation had been abandoned after a series of accidents left 7 men dead and dozens more refusing to return to work. More digging revealed an 1891 newspaper article about a secret society called the Guardians of the Vale, who had allegedly performed sacrificial rituals in Blackwood Forest to keep the old powers bound. The article dismissed them as a hoax or local superstition, but included a grainy photograph of 8 hooded figures standing around a freshly cut stump. The same stump I had found. I became obsessed, volunteering for every patrol in Blackwood, spending my days off wandering the trails, listening. Sometimes the whispers returned, guiding me to places that shouldn't exist. Groves where the seasons ran backwards, springs whose water showed you glimpses of your own past, caves that seemed to breathe with a rhythm older than humanity. The other rangers noticed the change in me. "Blackwood's got him," I overheard one saying. "Same thing happened to Ferguson back in '97. He'll either snap out of it or disappear one day." I should have been concerned by their words, but I wasn't. Each visit to the stump in the clearing revealed more, not just about the forest, but about myself. My grandmother hadn't just visited Blackwood, she had been one of its protectors, part of a lineage stretching back generations. The accidents that had befallen the logging company hadn't been accidents at all, but the forest defending itself through those humans who could hear its whispers. 6 months into my communion with Blackwood, I made a discovery that changed everything. Deep in the forest, far from any official trail, I found a cave entrance hidden behind a curtain of vines. The whispers had led me there, more urgent than I'd ever heard them. Inside, the cave walls were covered with the same symbols carved into the stump, glowing faintly with phosphorescent fungi. The passage descended steeply, the air growing warmer rather than cooler as I ventured deeper. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. At its center, illuminated by a shaft of light from some unseen opening above, was an enormous tree root, thicker than my body, pulsing visibly with life. It emerged from the chamber ceiling and plunged into the stone floor, continuing its journey to unknown depths. This was the true heart of Blackwood, not the stump in the clearing, but this living root that had survived the loggers' saws. The whispers here were deafening, thousands of voices speaking as one. The binding weakens, the iron corrodes, the blood thins. Soon we will be whole again. I approached the root, drawn by an irresistible pull. Unlike the gentle connection I'd experienced at the stump, this was overwhelming. The full consciousness of Blackwood crashing into my mind like a tsunami. I saw everything at once. The forest's birth millennia ago, its growth and awareness developing over centuries, the arrival of humans, first revering, then fearing, then attempting to destroy. The ritual that had bound its consciousness, fragmenting it into the whispers I had been hearing. And I saw what would happen if that binding broke completely. Blackwood expanding beyond its current boundaries, reclaiming the town of Millfield and beyond, its influence spreading like mycelia through the soil, connecting with other old-growth fragments across the continent. Not malevolent, but utterly inhuman in its priorities and perceptions. A return to an earlier age, when forests were not resource or scenery, but the dominant power on the landscape. I understood then what my grandmother and others before her had done. They hadn't been simply protecting the forest from humans, they had been protecting humans from the forest, maintaining a balance, a boundary between worlds. The root pulsed, sending vibrations through the cave floor. A crack appeared in the stone near my feet, widening rapidly. From it emerged a shoot, green and new and impossibly fast-growing. As I watched, it became a sapling, then a young tree, its branches reaching for the light shaft above. "The time of binding ends," the whispers declared. "The time of growth begins. You will be our first, our speaker, our bridge. Through your blood, we return." The sapling's branches moved like arms reaching for me. Where they touched my skin, tiny roots burrowed painlessly beneath the surface, creating intricate patterns like living tattoos. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of rightness, of connection. In that moment of joining, I saw two possible futures with perfect clarity. In one, I became the forest's voice, its ambassador to humanity, negotiating a new relationship as Blackwood expanded beyond its boundaries. In the other, I used the knowledge gained from my grandmother's bloodline to renew the binding, to keep the ancient power contained for another generation. Choice. It always came down to choice. That was the difference between humans and forests. Our lives were brief but full of crossroads and decisions. Blackwood had existed for millennia, patient and inexorable in its growth. It understood time differently. I made my choice that day in the cave. Which path I chose? Well, that's not something I can tell you directly. But if you visit Millfield now, you might notice how the forest seems healthier than ever, yet never grows beyond its original boundaries. You might see me walking the trails in my ranger uniform, looking somehow both younger and older than my years, with strange patterns visible on my skin when the sunlight hits just right. And if you venture into the deep woods, away from the marked paths, you might hear whispers among the trees. If you do, ask yourself, are you hearing the forest speak, or are you hearing me? After all, every forest needs its rangers, its protectors, its listeners. Sometimes it creates them, sometimes it becomes them. If you ever find yourself walking in ancient woods and the whispers begin, will you listen? Will you answer? The choice, as always, will be yours. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Dark Veil, and tell us in the comments. Have you ever felt like a forest was trying to communicate with you? What did it say?